Okay, so it looks like our topic is character and moral imagination. I wasn't sure. I think exactly what that means is a little subjective, but I wrote several notes down and I was hoping to just have a fluid conversation and see where it goes. Um, a couple things that we have talked about that I thought would be fun to explore are I know that you've mentioned how you were interested in the debate between might versus right. That's a topic that came to mind when I was thinking about this prompt. And um, I was hoping to bring up what's been on my mind recently as I've been thinking about morality is a book I just finished called Huckleberry Finn, which I thought I would insert some of my own ideas about. And I don't know if you would remember, but um, I could reference quotes from the book and or just bring up ideas that are related to what I read, even if we don't we both if we don't both have a common thing to look at about the book. And then yeah, I just had some questions in here. Um, one was about how I think we've also talked about how morality tends to fluctuate over time on a collective level instead of, progressively improve. That was something I was curious about to talk about. Um, how subjective morality is, how much of what we understand as something that's morally correct is less subjective than we might think.
Say that
Um,
again, please.
it one thing I was thinking about is how subjective is morality and how much of what we think is a moral thing to do is less objective than we think. Um, so yeah, these are just some of the thoughts that were floating around in my head prior to the conversation.
Hmm. Um, so I just want to make clear, I didn't pick this topic, uh, character and the moral imagination. Um, and I'm not going to quiz you as to where you came up with it, but from the way you're speaking, you didn't actually sit down and say, well, this is a topic I'd like to talk with Grandpa about. Somehow you've got.
Well, yeah, I actually thought that my understanding was that the topics were preset, and this was the preset topic for our conversation.
So whoever put this project together might have done it. It could have been your father or your aunt, for instance.
Right.
Interesting. Um, which means that because you were, uh, I'll assume, a willing participant in the project, they had the power to determine the rubric under which we're having this conversation.
Right.
Well, the reason I'm putting it that way is because you talked about morals. How do you know if something is moral or fluctuates and so on? Um, the word image, I mean, imagination is the ability to conjure an image. The word image comes from a word meaning to copy, and it comes from a word mag, M-A-G-H, Proto-Indo-European, meaning to be able or power. And it occurs to me that if I can impose my imagination on someone else, if I can get them to feel the automatic rightness of my view of things, that power has constrained or informed, depending upon whether you think this is a bad thing or a good thing, their morality. So I may be mistaken, but I remember reading once that the word thug comes from the name of a sect, Thuga, who took it as a an act of religious um, excellence to kill an infidel. I don't think that killing somebody you've never met just to perpetrate your own culture is a good thing. I don't think it's a moral thing. From my morality, not at all. But for someone else's morality, apparently, if that etymology is correct, yes. Um, so morality is entwined with the notion of power, it seems to me. And when you talk about, is something moral, um, there are loads of things that happen in the world that I don't think of as being um, moral, but I understand that they might, and they might have lots of backing, so that the culture lends a kind of power base to this. In The Left Hand of Darkness, Ursula Le Guin has someone who has come to a planet that had never seen outsiders. They didn't even know there were other inhabited planets. And he comes with a device that allows him to communicate instantaneously, which of course can't happen, instantaneously to, across the galaxy. And the king, who wants to figure out how to deal with this outsider, says, ask your people um, how to define a traitor. And the answer comes back, no man thinks he's a traitor because he believes that what he's doing is right. That's what it says in the book. I don't know if that's true. I think there must be some people who decide, I know I'm being a traitor, but screw it. I want the money or I want the revenge or whatever it is. I don't think that the book is necessarily right, but the idea that whether or not you're a traitor depends upon your own judgment about your actions seems to me to say, of course it was moral for me to do it. Look at what that country did to me. I had every right to make things worse in that country. Whereas other people would say, this is the land where you worked and had food and shelter and so on, and this is how you repay your country. Moral, immoral, it is, as you said, subjective. So if morality goes up and down, maybe what we're really talking about is the comparative fragmentation of the culture that deals with that morality and the relative power of the individuals within that culture. That is, when a president says, if a president,
Right.
it's not against the law, that's saying, your social class, your position exempts you, or it changes this.
Yeah. Those are some very, very interesting thoughts. Thank you. Yeah. So there were a few things that I thought that I was really interested by, which the first being that our moral decisions or our understanding of what is moral has a lot to do with power. The other was that sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here. The other is that the other was a question of my own about whether or not individuals can be inherently bad without having some perceived weakness about themselves. Um, and then the other was I don't want to reiterate something I was saying in the beginning, but how much of what we believe is a kind of like a collective fiction. Like when Trump says something enough times, there are a lot of people who will believe that that's true, and that can really become confused with what is true. And there are some things that feel like I have an objective sense of not being moral, but it does make me question whether or not I can know exactly what is moral.
Okay. The word moral is cognate with the word mores. That is, mores are the things that are done in a given society. You know, I grew up where men always held the door for women. It was just a simple little thing, but it was one of the mores. Ladies first, you know. It's not a kind thing to say when there is a murderer walking into the room. But, in general, that's meant to show a certain kind of deference, which is based on the notion, which may be, in fact, a bad one, that men, by virtue of being stronger, have an obligation to defer to women and protect them and so on. Lots of women don't want to be thought of that way. But I think that's the background. It's a cultural thing, it's a more. And so when we talk about morals, we're talking about the habitual ways in which people function, supposing that the society is one that we agree we should want to live in. By the way, the word habit is also cognate with inhabit, right? So how you live is your morality.
You
And
inhabit the moral framework.
exactly,
That's
exactly. And that brings us to another idea that comes, I was thinking about the title. Um,
yeah.
the word character goes back ultimately to a Greek word meaning a pointed stick, because the pointed stick is used to scratch marks, like in clay. So the word character, A, B, C, and D are all characters in our alphabet. The word character initially means something that's scratched, something that's engraved. So when I say that I am someone of a certain character, or you are someone of a certain character, what we're saying is these are our habitual behaviors.
It's like a pattern that's observable about the moral framework that you have inhabited and that has manifested itself in your behavior.
Exactly. If that is the case, and that is the case, I think that's what we mean when we say this is a person of good character, this is a person of bad character. What we mean is that the person of good character is enacting the morals that are viewed as at least neutral or positive in the culture. And the person of bad character is either amoral, doesn't care about the morals, or immoral, actually goes against those. So you asked earlier, is there someone who's inherently immoral? And I would say that a psychopath is inherently immoral by definition, because human beings function in cultures, and um, in order to have behaviors judged as moral or immoral, you have to care about how your behavior is imagined by other people. But if you don't care at all, if you're just out of that, then you are not a moral creature. Whether what you do happens to be okay with people or not, you're just not a moral creature. And beyond that, though, I think the answer depends upon culture, and cultures change. I mean, you and I both are currently in New Jersey, but although I have a background from Michigan behind me, we're both in New Jersey, but I'm 80 and you're 21,
Yeah.
and I'm living on savings, um, and you are thinking about how to make a living in the world, and I'm talking to my grandson, and you don't know for sure if you will ever have a grandson. Although you could know for sure if you're committed not to, but even that could change over time. So in a way, we aren't occupying the same world, or we're occupying the same world differently.
Yeah.
So do we have a shared morality? Probably. There's a huge overlap in our moralities because we're in the same family. So your father grew up in my house, and you grew up in his house. So there's that continuity. But things are different.
I see. Thank you for offering these anecdotes because I was really all over the place in my thinking, and now I'm feeling like I'm sinking into the conversation. This is giving it some direction. So is what you were saying about you offered an example of a psychopath, and something that occurred to me about that is that most people I understand is existing on a spectrum of how good or bad a person can be, and a lot of the way that they are being related to things that have happened to them in their own life. But with a psychopath, there's something fixed about them that makes the way that their brain works fundamentally different that wasn't in their control that they were born with. So, did you offer that example because that's something that's fixed?
By fixed, you mean
Something
unchangeable?
that's something
Unchangeable.
unchangeable. Hmm.
Um, I don't know enough about psychopathology. I don't know whether or not someone who could legitimately be judged as psychopathic um, could ever change. I do believe that people can change, but going back to the term character, engraved, change is a lot easier when you're young, and it gets a lot harder because your behaviors are habitual. If somebody is used to caring what other people think, um, then it would be pretty hard to make them be psychopaths. And if someone is used to just not ever taking anyone else's situation and feelings into account, getting them to suddenly do that, well, it couldn't be sudden. Getting them to do that would be pretty difficult, I would think.
Whether you can technically, it's something that can technically be changed about that person or not, even if it's something that is a pattern that's gone on for so long that it would be really difficult to change. I think maybe the point is that our empathy for one another motivates us to try to satisfy a, a shared framework for that's cultural for morality. And that is has to be motivated by social factors like the other people in a society or a culture. So
That's always been true for you, which is one of the things that made you so extraordinary, even as a little boy. I mean, I remember you preparing your room for play dates so that the person coming over would find things that he would enjoy. And, no one taught you to do that. You have an enormous amount of empathy, which has grown as you have continued to practice it. It's become ever more engraved in your character. But let me remind you of, the old joke about the sadist and the masochist. And the masochist says, "Hurt me, hurt me," and the sadist says, "No." So the sadist is taking pleasure by not hurting somebody, although that's the definition of sadism. In fact, going back to Krafft-Ebing, that sexual pleasure, in fact, by hurting somebody. In the joke, he's getting his sexual pleasure by not hurting somebody because he knows that this is someone who wants to be hurt. So if you're talking about somebody having an inherent morality, um, is it possible to, or desirable for that matter, to change someone so that they will not feel the gratifications that they feel?
hmm,
And I don't feel pleasure personally, either by hurting people or by being hurt by people. But I know lots and lots and lots of people to some extent do. I'm not talking about being certifiable and so on. I mean, lots and lots of people like a little bit of restraint or a little bit of, pushing around or whatever, and it makes things a little more exciting for them. Um,
yeah.
it, I don't think of it as immoral if it's between consenting adults. I think of it as radically immoral if a 20-year-old is doing it with a 12-year-old. So again, I'm trying to imagine the situation of that 12-year-old and
Yeah,
thinking, you deserve protection. You do not deserve to be the instrument of satisfaction for this other person. That's
right.
my morality. But it comes into play by virtue of imagination.
I see. Do you think it seems to me when you're giving the example of a person who derives pleasure from hurting somebody else or from getting hurt, that must be a reaction to something that happened to them. But I'm not sure if that's true. If it can be, if it's something about them that can be changed and not because of something, unchangeable about the way that their brain works, it seems to me that must be a reaction to something bad that happened to them. Like,
I'm sure that that is the case for lots of people, but I don't think that's the only way it can
not
happen.
for,
I mean,
yeah,
you know more about sports than I do by far, but my understanding is that certainly in football and basketball, um, penalties can be assessed against players who have unsportsmanlike behavior. And one of the unsportsmanlike behaviors is gloating, showing how glad you are that you won and the other guy lost. You know, those
yeah,
elaborate displays in the end zone. Um, so I think wanting to win in a game is something that seems to be a pretty widespread aspect of humanity in pretty much every culture that I've thought about. Um, but I don't think that just because you like to win means you're a sadist. Um,
no,
but some people obviously get so carried away with, ha ha, I won, you didn't, that in order to keep the game satisfactory for the larger society, which they need to for financial reasons, these professional leagues are money machines after all. You got to
yeah,
say, no, no, you can't go that far. You can be glad you won, but you're not allowed to be glad that the other guy lost. You're supposed to be sorry when you hurt that other guy, even though we know the injury rate in the NFL is 100%.
yeah,
All of this is a way of trying to respond to your question. Does it have to be something that happened to you? And my guess is it is so normal that all primates deal with territoriality, right? They all, we want to protect our territory against those other guys. We want to keep the bananas for us, whatever it is. So we have these two different impulses, the centripetal ones that draw us together, and the centrifugal ones that throw us apart. So we meet these other guys, you know, there's that competition, and we are supposed to feel good when we succeed in defending our territory. I mean, pretty much everything that is crucial to our survival evolutionarily feels good. Assuaging
mhm,
hunger, getting sleep, having sex, enjoying conversation.
yeah. Well, I guess that the underneath the cultural reasons that we have for whatever our cultural moral framework is, there, as you're saying, are also these biological motivations. And but what I was trying to nod to earlier was that it seems like some people, I guess I was associating that your example of somebody who enjoys getting hurt and enjoys hurting other people, not with somebody who's willing to do that to win, but with somebody who has the self-destructive enjoyment of losing.
Um, you know, Human beings offer so many examples, each different, each worthy of respect and examination. I'm going to pick one. If it's off to the side, tell me if it's right. I hope it's illuminating. It seems to me that there are clowns in the world. The class clown, for example, or the court jester, or the guy who shrugs and says, well, I'm just a little country lawyer, or, well, you can't expect me to understand it, it's too complicated. Or I, I think there are a lot of people who sometimes only in one domain, but sometimes it becomes their overall character, like the class clown, um, who recognize that they can't compete in some way that their culture validates and that they wished they could. And so they put themselves down before anybody else can. So they make believe they can't walk and they have a pratfall. They make believe they can't understand, so they say something silly. And that way, you can't say to them, you are weak, you are stupid, because they embrace this weakness and stupidity and make an art out of it. Um, in that sense, I'm not quite sure what it means to say that somebody did something to them. I mean, if they had grown up in a way that gave them a sense of self-esteem, a supportive home of unconditional love, maybe they wouldn't have become clowns. But our society also values clowns. And, there are comedians who make a heck of a good living by taking their hurt and their defensiveness against it and turning it into a profession. So I'm trying to think of what it means to say someone must have done something.
Yeah.
Um,
Somebody can interpret that something has been done to them when it was really they were the ones that motivated that interpretation. So it was really them imposing that thing onto the world and it came from within themselves. So
yeah,
it kind of seems to become a difficult balance between nature and nurture, maybe.
I, I've heard you come up to that um, conundrum before, and I think wisely.
Yeah. But hmm,
I remember when my maternal grandmother died. My mother, so let's see, who was, I think, in her 50s at the time. My mother sort of wailed quite histrionically, so like we're all supposed to notice. Um, I don't want to be an orphan. Well, A, her father was still alive, and so that may say something about her relationship with her father as opposed to her mother. And B, when you're in your 50s, what does it exactly mean to say you're an orphan? I mean, lots of people's parents have died by the time they're 50. Almost no one goes around adopting 50-year-olds because they're suddenly homeless. So what was she trying to say? And in part, I think
well,
she was saying that um, I no longer have I no longer have refuge. It was about her. And maybe she needed that. But I have a feeling a lot of these people you're talking about, did somebody do, you hear there's work going on outside?
I can't hear. Zoom does a good job of blocking it out. Can you hear that this lawnmower is going on to
No,
the
I can't.
side of me? Okay. That's good because I was worried. But anyway,
Great. That's wonderful that we have assistive technology here. Uh,
yes.
but, the reason I'm raising this example, which stuck with me, I was there at the funeral, is that it, it's not obvious that anybody did anything to my mother. But that
Wow.
doesn't mean
Yeah.
she didn't feel that something had been done to her. As
Yeah.
John Stewart says, "Oh God, why me?" Is there a God and does she care? I mean, but
Yeah.
we feel that. So I guess I'm with
It,
you, but I'm also trying to retain the subjectivity aspect in the evolution of that particular immoral or amoral behavior.
right. E- I think I think that what you're saying is that in either case, this person perceives that they're reacting to something else, but it's a they're and what they're doing is motivated by a complex combination of what they have imposed onto the world or what has been imposed onto them. But
This goes
it
back to
it's
this is just what Le Guin was saying. No man thinks of himself as a traitor. That may have been too absolute, but I didn't do anything wrong. They deserved it.
right. And it seems to me that you're describing a way of and we're both kind of talking about a way of thinking that is she frames herself as being a victim to something, even though the natural progression of life is that you lose your parents, and now she could also frame it as that she has family that she didn't have before. So,
Yep. I remember, I'm sure I've mentioned this episode to you before, but for the sake of posterity, I'll mention it again. There was a period when there were airplane hijackings going on, and a particular plane got hijacked, and where the hijackers wanted to go required more fuel than the plane had on board. So they forced the plane to land, or they forced the pilot to land the plane and said, refuel the plane. And if you prevent us from going, we will start killing people on the plane. And, every 5 minutes we will. Right? And they brought in in fact, in the airport, they put chucks in front of the tires so the pilot could not take off. And FBI, had sharpshooters around. And one guy was instructed to shoot out the front tires. And he did. And 5 minutes later, a body got dropped onto the tarmac. And a journalist, a television reporter, came up to him. I remember seeing this on the TV. He came up to him and said, "How does it feel to know you just killed that person?" Which I thought was just about the most horrible question you could possibly have asked. Whatever guilt that sharpshooter had, and I don't know that he felt any, the whole process that he was involved in was to prevent more harm coming to those hostages and to make hostage taking obviously ineffective so that there would be no more hijackings in the future, right? Who did the who had the responsibility? When you talk about a moral act, there has to be
yeah,
some sense of volition. You did it. I mean, if I turn the corner too fast, at the edge of a building on the sidewalk, I turn the corner too fast, and a little kid is there below my line of sight, and I bump into the kid, and the kid falls over and scrapes his hand landing. I'll feel real bad for the kid, but I won't feel that I had done an immoral act, right? I mean, it happened. I needed to turn the corner. This sharpshooter, I hope, thought I needed to do this for the greater good, some kind of utilitarian calculus. I didn't kill that person. The hijacker who put a bullet in that person is the one who killed him. The hijacker could have chosen not to. I didn't do it. We can debate about that. But the question of the morality depends upon the answer to that debate. You're back. Your microphone is muted, by the way, Zach.
sorry about that. The lawnmower was just getting a little bit too loud for me to think, so I'm moving locations.
That's wonderful. I couldn't hear the lawnmower at all.
I know it's amazing that it can drown that out.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. I was gonna try to stick it out, but it was making it difficult.
Let me
Anyway, I,
let me make one more comment, if I may.
yeah.
I'm thinking of the book Light in August. Um,
Mhm.
I hope I've got the right title. In which there is a character named Joe Christmas. And Joe Christmas is a criminal, does all kinds of bad things, doesn't matter what. Obviously, the fact that his name is Joe Christmas means that Faulkner, the author, had symbolic ideas in mind and so on. And one of the things that the book makes clear is that this character is of mixed race. And being of mixed race, growing up where he grew up in Mississippi at that time, 100 years ago from now, the whites wouldn't accept him and the blacks wouldn't accept him. And so he was inevitably ostracized everywhere that he went. When we encounter him, he's a criminal, say a murderer. Reading that book didn't make me want to say the murder is okay, but my sense about the morality involved changed enormously because inhabiting his soul, psyche in Greek, seeing the world through his viewpoint, understanding how he got to where he got and the choices that he could imagine for himself, made me feel sympathy for the anguish that he had to live with his whole life. That didn't justify him doing bad things to other people. Someone who has a painful disease doesn't have the right to pick up a gun and kill other people, in my view. But that someone lashes out, it's not the same as saying, oh, he's evil, bad, immoral. So I think
Yeah.
that's another aspect of the question you're raising, not simply how you behave, but how you judge other people's behaviors. And that
Hmm.
depends not only on the culture you come from, but what you know about them and what you feel about what you know about them.
That's a really good point. Hmm. I'm trying to think about, I have a couple different points floating around in my mind, and with the pressure of the meeting being recorded, I'm getting lost trying to think about what applies to what you were saying and how to interpret what you were saying. Um, there's a quote that's coming to mind, and I don't know how relevant it is, but I read it the other day, and it said, "You are not what you think you are." Here, wait, let me try to look up this. What you th It's an interesting quote. It's something to your point about how you are not what you think you are, but you are what you think they think you are. So you understand yourself through your judgments of other people's behaviors, in part, or through your understanding of why other people behave the way that they do. In other,
I don't feel I'm fully understanding you, Zach.
yeah, I might be getting a little bit lost, but but a lot of the way that you understand other people, I think, is are projections of your understanding of yourself projected onto other people.
Could you give me an example?
Um, well, in the example of the person that you just mentioned, murdering other people, he's doing something that's very bad, and maybe in the book he's not murdering people that necessarily did something bad to him, but he thinks that they did because his understanding of the world has been informed by, I don't know, I'm getting a little bit lost too with my example here. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I do think that most people, in part, see themselves as they believe they are being seen.
Mm.
That is, if people, if you believe that people think that you are kind,
Mhm.
it's easier to think of yourself as kind. Um, Grandma and I give monthly contributions to certain organizations that we believe need support to make the world the way we would like it to be. And but we are not wealthy. I can imagine one person could look at my bank statements and say, "Wow, what a piker you are. You've got money, and look at how little you give." Another person could look at my bank statements and say, "Wow, I'm so disgusted with the way the world is now. I don't think that change is possible. I don't bother giving to anybody." And another person could look at it and say, "You want to change the world in that direction? Where do you get off?" If I if I judge that the person who said it's good that you're doing what you can to make the world better that way, if I judge that that's the kind of person that I would like and whose opinion I could value, that makes me feel good. And it makes me feel that my behavior is valuable. But if the person who says you're a piker, if you really meant it, you'd do more. If I felt that about that individual, I suddenly might feel I'm inadequate. I need to change. And that would be, in a sense, a response to a moral argument, which might or might not lead to a change in character, what's engraved. Is this
Wait,
getting to
wait,
what
would
you're
you?
pointing to?
I think so. Would you repeat the last part about what was he feeling inadequate compared to again?
If the person looks at my statements and says, "You're a piker. If you really believed in these things, you'd give more money for this, and you have the money, you know,
Mhm.
just, you say you want to save it to leave it to your children. Well, your children,
Mhm.
that that's not the point. You should leave them a better world. You're
Yeah.
you're you're messing this up. If I felt that person was a model, someone, wow, I'd like to be like that person. That person thinking badly of me for the very thing that I thought was good, that might lead to me making a change, at least a change in how I felt about my own acts, but it might even make a change in how I distributed my funds. So it's a moral argument. It may be couched in terms of, political or financial absolutes, but underlying it, there's a moral argument. How does one behave in society? Do we have a right to try to change it? And if we do, how much of an obligation do we have to try to do that in the proper way? I'm thinking, is
Mhm.
that
Yeah. Am I understanding that in your example, this person, even though they may be motivated to respond to this person's qualm with their giving of money, in part because they look up to this person, there's a grain of truth in what they're saying that is a legitimate moral argument, and so even though there are subjective reasons that kind of motivate changes in our behavior, where we are responding to universal elements of what is a moral thing to do.
that's insightful, I think. The grain of truth exists, because I have already decided he is a good person.
Hmm.
It's because I value his character, his criticism matters to me. And therefore I am willing to see a grain of truth in it. If in fact this were somebody who only ever gives money because he wants to signal virtue to help his business prospects,
Right.
then I wouldn't care. So the grain of truth comes from a shared sense of what are valuable things, but people
Yeah.
aren't identical, they overlap and so on.
And it seems like a double-sided coin because people can change their behavior to do things that hurt other people, maybe in a response to something that somebody that they look up to might say. But this is also the same mechanism by which we can come to a shared understanding of what the right thing to do is.
You draft
And
somebody,
nudge people back into line who are doing things that they shouldn't be doing.
so that's a hopeful viewpoint. Right? You
Yeah.
draft people into a war that they do not support and now tell them go kill. And they grew up thinking you're not supposed to kill. How do you nudge them? How can that
And it can
act
be
become moral?
right. It's I'm noticing a pattern as we're talking in the beliefs of people about what is moral as being as shifting over time in reaction to other variables. Like it's something that's coming to mind for me is that just like one person can change their belief about what the right thing to do is in response to what another person might say, a greater pattern I bet emerges where what a society believes is the right thing to do changes over time and reacts to itself over time. And it brings up what you were saying with the example of people wanting to win in sports. I don't about what things are universal about what is moral. Are we reacting to
Yeah.
biological things that are always there about our that relate to our will to survive or yeah,
It, it could be more than one thing.
right, of course.
And you read the US Constitution from the vantage, well, at least from my vantage, and recognize how much of it is constructed in order to make possible the continuation of slavery. Like the Electoral College is a compromise to keep slaveholding states, and so on. Um, I like to believe that that is no longer an acceptable idea to pretty much anybody. I'm not saying that there's no racism in our society. That would be willful blindness. But certainly the idea that people of a certain skin color deserve to be property and their children deserve to be property, that's gone. So, yes, it is possible for morality in a whole culture to change. Um,
Right. And yet, ripples of what was there before really affect the present, and we can't totally escape them. How we relate to one another on the basis of gender and how our legal system is designed, those things are still, I mean, those are random examples, or I don't know about random, but a couple of many possible examples, but they reflect that we we don't get to just create a new system without responding to the system that was there before.
Absolutely right. Very wise. I think I told you that Grandma and I are currently reading a book called Not a Nation of Immigrants for the local book club. And I mentioned that to a fellow resident who is also in the book club. And this is the kind of history that makes you look back at the US and say, oh my God, is that really what we did? And, it's not nice. And this person said, oh, I just stopped reading it. And I
Right.
said, you want to protect yourself? And the response was, absolutely. Now, this is a person I know well and like and spend time with. But Nope, was not willing to understand how those ripples continued. So moral
Um,
change is not easy.
to me, it's clear that that's a person who's acting out of or I don't know if it's clear, but it seems that that's a person who's acting out of a fear that their own beliefs are wrong and they don't want to have to, or in some way are not, it could be improved and they don't want to have to come to terms with that reality. Maybe that person has been that way for so long that it would be really difficult to change. But it also reminds me of what we were talking about before about who can change. And it seems like the behavior of someone who has the possibility of changing, whereas somebody who is a psychopath or something wouldn't. Well, I guess we'd have to come closer to what the definition of a psychopath is. But I guess what I'm trying to make a point about is that most people who most people have in common that they have an incentive to at least react to the arguments of others. Uh,
That is a typically kind comment from you, in my view.
Perhaps
I mean, what you're
not
saying
sure.
is that this person needs to be aggressively rejecting the book for fear that it might require change. Whereas a psychopath wouldn't give a damn, right? You can tell me
Right.
I need to change. I don't care.
The fear wouldn't be there in the first place because their motivation would just be different in the first place from the beginning. Yeah. But
Right. Grandson, you are a good man.
I have a question. We keep talking about morality as a something that exists uh, culturally, but do you think that the that set of reactions that we were talking about that it goes around a point? Is there a clear point? I mean, when we look back, is it objectively true that that slavery was wrong? It seems to me that it must be, and yet it wasn't clear. So what I'm saying is it only a fiction that we embrace as a culture, or are we, do you know what I'm trying to maybe get to? It,
Um,
it, are there any strict principles or definitions of what is morally correct, or is it totally
well,
dependent on the context
well,
and the culture?
when it comes to philosophy, there are different philosophies, and it's not easy to argue that A is right and B is wrong in any given situation because the judgment of right and wrong depends upon the context in which one understands how that philosophy functions. So I think the answer is from a theoretical viewpoint, no. There is no point that is absolute, although I'll come back to that in just a second. But from a practical viewpoint, I think that there are such things. Practically speaking, human beings survive by being social animals. And anything that you do that inherently prevents you from functioning in a society, not necessarily the one you're in now. It could be the one you're in now, but changed by your behavior, the one to go to another one. But anything that prevents you from being able to function well in a society, one can argue, is inherently bad. And one could even say that a lot of those things are bad on a moral basis. They may just be, ineffective. So, but a lot of things, like yelling at strangers, lying to children. I mean, there are things that make it hard to function in our society, and I think that they're immoral. But it has to do with our society. Different societies
So
might do different.
really, I see. So what we have to kind of cling on to is things that seem universal in patterns that we can recognize.
But I think we need to recognize universality is
Also, so also not a
yeah,
uh,
socially constrained. I think I told you that I remember, I think it was in Ralph Linton's book, The Study of Man, um, in which it was reported, maybe this is no longer thought to be true, that anthropologists had studied, culture after culture after culture, and there was only one universal incest taboo. That it was, and that's the Oedipus story, in fact, that a mother-son sexual relationship is taboo in every society. But there are no other universal incest taboos.
Wow,
Um,
so even things that you would think are just fundamental to human beliefs are not necessarily.
that's why I'm mentioning it.
Yeah.
Uh,
Um,
there's a book by a guy named I think it's W.R. Ahrens, Ahrens. His first name was Bill, called The Man-Eating Myth. And he did a survey among people at the American Anthropological Society. He wanted to find out who had actually seen cannibalism. Not, I'm going to eat the heart of my enemy in order to gain his spirit, but, we're hungry, we'll go to the next village, we'll grab some people and we'll make lunch out of them. How many people had ever seen cannibalism? And according to this book, he could not find a single anthropologist who could claim to have witnessed dietary cannibalism. Every single example that he could find, according to this book, was the report that a anthropologist was able to get from a given tribe, say, about the neighboring tribe. And so what Ahrens concluded was that the claim of cannibalism is meant as a marker of character. Those people are cannibals. That shows how bad they are. That there, in fact, were no cannibals, that is, dietary cannibals. There were none, but there were the
yeah.
claims of cannibalism. Okay, and the reason I mention that is while Linton said the only universal taboo, incest taboo, was mother-son, it may well be that there is a universal taboo against dietary cannibalism.
And what is that? Does that suggest that that actually is universal or just insofar as we can observe?
Well, these
It's
anthropologists
debatable.
try to go everywhere, so, they may have missed someplace, but
It is interesting, though, that it does at least demonstrate that we also construct our moral frameworks in, this goes back to what you were saying before about our judgments of other people, around our judgments of the other culture.
yep, yep. That's when the Soviet Union, well, the Berlin Wall comes down in 1989 and the Soviet Union begins to fragment in 1991,
Mhm.
long before you were born, but I remember it quite vividly. And I'm sure your parents do as well. Um, they were in their 20s at the time. Um, in America, before that, we had seen Russia, Soviet Union, a 70-year run from 1921 with the new economic policy that Lenin puts in place to 1991 when the Soviet Union fragments. In all
Mhm.
of that time in between, enough to go through three generations in over there, we kept referring to godless communists, godless communists. And in 1991, all of a sudden, you got all these Russian Orthodox people. Where were they for 70 years? How come they were godless communists? Because the way we in America constructed communism, it was important to call it godless.
Mhm.
And it is true that Marx, in fact, doesn't favor religion. But it's also true that Soviet communism was not Marx. So,
It's a really
you know,
interesting example.
well, that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
right?
Because yes, because it's
Constructed.
not right. It's control. It's one system isn't it really it's isn't necessarily better than the other. Um it just depends on the way that you're looking at it
Well, I think
and the results of how it's functioning. I mean, a
some
good example
systems
of
are
it,
better than other ones.
that's true, but a lot of the way that you might understand another system is because you're responding to how it relates to your own. And
Yeah.
something you once said, we were talking about prison systems, and one way that we decided that the North Korean, or that you said that we can decide the North Korean prison system isn't ideal, is because of who it serves to benefit. So we can understand systems kind of maybe through their effect and like that,
Yeah.
or who they're served to center around.
Although, of course, there are some philosophers who would argue that if you're just going to judge the morality of something by its effects, then you don't really have a moral principle.
Mm, that's true. That's a good point.
But I'd
It's
like to
yeah.
think that you can have a moral principle and recognize that it can't be fully enacted. So, for instance,
Mhm.
I'm a pacifist. I don't want to go to war. I don't want to kill anybody. But if somebody walked up to you brandishing a knife, and I happened to have a tire iron in my hand, I'd smash that guy's skull as fast as I could
Mhm.
because you're my grandson and I'm against murder, and I'm not going to let somebody murder in general, but I'm certainly not going to let him murder you. And yet,
Yeah.
I'm a pacifist, so
Yeah, I see what you're getting to. Well, there's another thing that's coming to mind for me is that I'm wondering about technology and how this intersects with morality because we have these different systems like communism and democracy and they function on their own, but when in our modern world, technology is changing for everyone, regardless of what their political system is, and it's straining many different political systems.
I think because we had intended to have this be a shorter conversation,
Oh, right. Maybe
but
it'd be
but
better.
in fact,
I wasn't even looking at the
I
time.
love talking with you all the time, Zach. Maybe we can make this part of another conversation, but I'd like to
Yeah.
offer one small response so as not
Hmm.
to disrespect the importance of the question. When technological changes occur, who has which power changes.
Hmm.
So if you have the first people who get telephones are the rich people, and they can do things by virtue of having telephones that other people can't. Um, that modern warfare is going to become less and less gendered, I believe, because body strength is going to become less and less relevant to figuring out who makes a good operative in defense or offense militarily, right? A 4'10" intelligent 45-year-old woman can run a drone 6,000 miles away just as well as a strapping 20-year-old 6'2" man. So the technology will change who has what kind of power. And to the extent that morality is a reflection of who makes things happen, going back to the etymologies, undoubtedly technology will change moralities.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it's interesting to see how that can cause a lot of chaos as people try to adapt to new technologies when the rate of change increases by a lot more than it has in the past, like is happening now. But this may be better for a second conversation.
Okay. Well, in that
Okay.
case, let me say I love talking with you, and I look forward to the next time, whether it's recorded or not.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I look forward to it as well. This was a great conversation. Should we stop the recording or should we end the call? Do you want to stop the recording and then talk for a minute before?
Yeah, I think we'll stop the recording because God knows who might be listening.